I see two only slightly related conflicts affecting us in the Western world at least. One is the range of ethnic, racial, cultural, religious conflicts resulting partly from globalization, partly from the bitter conflicts taking place in the Middle East and in North Africa, which then wash into our societies in Europe as well. That's one sect that we're having great difficulty coping with. Second is the growing gulf between the very, very rich and everybody else. In the middle part of the 20th century, we became accustomed to societies that were unequal, but they were becoming slightly less unequal. At the moment, exactly the opposite is happening, and enormous gulfs of inequality, which have a lot of implications for conflict. Well, they can't, partly because political institutions in particular develop very slowly, especially if we think of political parties, which are the main institutions we see for managing conflict for us. They develop very slowly. They can only be organized around a limited number of themes. Meanwhile, society is much more protean. It's much more chaotic. It's changing all the time. It's got a mass of things that are partly related, partly unrelated. And so it's extremely difficult for political institutions to respond rapidly to what's going on in society. Now, it's true that most political parties do have a narrative around my two big conflict themes, but none of them are finding it particularly easy to express these. And in particular, the general population is losing its attachment to parties at the same time. So the parties are having trouble keeping in touch with the changing conflicts, and the gulf between parties and population is increasing at the same time. Formal institutions change only slowly and are rather rough in the way they can relate to society, strangely. But politics isn't just about formal institutions. It's also about a mass of informal forms of influence and pressure and lobbying and campaigning. And that responds much more quickly to society. That is much more easily able to express itself. So then there are two issues. One which is actually not insuperable at all, and that is that eventually political parties learn from what's going on in society. They can almost use society as a kind of laboratory for how they're going to position themselves in the future. But the second issue is much more problematic, and that is, I mentioned inequality of wealth, growing inequality, as one of the problems in our society, one of our conflicts. That inequality is also reflected in how the informal side of politics is organized. The more wealth, the more capacity to act politically. And at first, a few years ago, we thought there was a challenge to that coming through social media, but now we're seeing how wealth is taking control of social media and able to use that just as it uses everything else, just as it uses lobbying, just as it uses mass media. So there is a real issue there that we need the informal networks of society to produce responses to conflicts for us, but those institutions themselves are heavily affected by inequality.